Donnie Darko is one of the most unique films that's ever been made.
I've been watching you.
In each video in this series, I want to take a few scenes from the film and break them down from a writing and directing standpoint and analyze the absolutely brilliant direction of writer and director Richard Kelly. If you're new here, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to my channel. I'm a narrative writer, director, and producer, and have been working in LA for the last 10 years. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and what filmmaking can teach us about life. Donnie Darko is my favorite film of all time, and one that I consider to be an absolute masterpiece. It's also the film that got me into filmmaking. And I'll also reveal at the end why this is one of the most unique films that's ever been made. So let's get into it. This is the third and final part in a series of videos where we dissect various scenes from the director's cut of Donnie Darko that illustrate the genius of Richard Kelly's writing and directing prowess, and why this is the most unique film that's ever been made. So with that set up, let's dive into the scenes. The movie theater scene. At the start of this scene, we show on the marquee that they're going into the Arrow Theater, which is located in Santa Monica. I like that they also show you what movie they're going in to see, which is The Evil Dead. It's a fun homage to, I'm sure Richard Kelly loves The Evil Dead and wanted to have a movie that was playing on the screen for one level of narrative. I love when filmmakers pay tribute to other filmmakers, especially ones that probably influenced them. I also want to comment just on the choice of putting them in the theater with plenty of room in the back, so you still have a lot of the seats that are going far behind them, and I like that they're at probably a late show time. There's not a lot of other people in the theater. And part of the reason I think this is an interesting choice, as we'll come to see, is that when we eventually see Frank, who is sitting next to them, and we establish that Gretchen is asleep, I really like that choice because it still keeps it consistent with the idea other people, if they were aware or they were there, might actually be seeing Frank. But it just so happens that because Gretchen's asleep and the theater's completely empty except for them two, Donnie's the only person there who could actually physically see Frank. So it stays consistent with the fact that maybe this isn't all just in his head, since every time Donnie sees Frank in the film, there's nobody else that's actually near him if you think about it. When he's on the golf course at night, he's completely alone. When he's in the movie theater, Gretchen's asleep, nobody else is in the theater that we see. And when we see him in the bathroom when he's talking to Frank, he's always completely alone. So I really like that, even though we established he's the living receiver who has these auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, it's also possible that other people could possibly be seeing Frank. We just always have the situation be there's no other way that anyone else could. I'm also a sucker for a well-lit shot in a movie theater when I'm watching a movie. I think movie theaters are just such a romanticized space, especially as a filmmaker. And so I always think it's a great chance to use the light from the projector screen at the back of the theater to cast a lot of motivated light onto the seats and the actors. And what's also really great from a lighting perspective is that the actors who are sitting facing camera oftentimes are being lit from the front by the movie theater screen, which tends to be pretty bright. So I think if you're thinking about it from a cinematography and a blocking standpoint, movie theaters actually end up being a pretty interesting place for great lighting that also feels motivated. Basically, motivated lighting just pertains to a specific light source within a scene that is either on camera or off that provides a believable source of light that would actually be coming from that source in the real world. And so I really like that in a movie theater, you have the light source that's motivated by the movie screen, and on the back side for the backlight you also have a motivated source from the projector. So I think it's just a good placement for actors in a movie theater where we have nice contrast and fall off behind them because it's dark, and then really nice key front lighting and nice backlighting, which are two of the 3 points of 3-point lighting. The other thing that I really want to point out that I love the most probably about this scene is the score. There is this beautifully haunting chant that's happening. There's a vocal chant. We hear this, it sounds like a woman that's chanting, and it almost sounds like a religious choir that you would hear in church. It almost sounds like the Gregorian chants that you would hear in certain Catholic churches. And so for me, it gives this haunting but religious feel. that to me symbolizes a deeper meaning and also supports some of the themes of the film that actually do talk about religion or the search for God or being alone and our place in the universe in a larger scale. So I think it really ties into this same element of us feeling the stakes are on a much grander and almost divine scale. I'm also just incredibly impressed by this custom costume that they made for the actual film. So costume designer April Ferry created the actual suit and the fur and built it herself. And then the mask for Frank was designed by sculptors Dale R. Brady and Rob Berman. I love the look of this bunny rabbit. I like that we have this tall 6-foot person in a bunny rabbit costume, but the sculpture of the face with the large eyes that are expressionless and the teeth that's grinning, it's an eerie costume. I think it's the stuff of nightmare fuel for sure. Richard Kelly also stated that he sketched out the design for the mask himself, and he wanted the initial reaction to the costume on screen to be intense and disturbing, so I think he achieved both of those objectives.
Why you wear that stupid bunny suit?
This is perhaps one of the most quotable pieces of the film that I see in a lot of different merchandise or fan art that's been made for the film.
Why are you wearing that stupid man suit?
I think it's a really nice line that speaks to we're all masking something, we're all wearing a mask of some sort, and it just also sounds so freaking creepy. And when Donnie and Frank start actually engaging in conversation, we go from the wide shot of seeing Gretchen, Donnie, and Frank all sitting in the same row to the close-up of Donnie and then the close-up of Frank. So I like that we bring it in, we make it feel a little more personal and intense, and then we sort of bring it back out. It's a classical filmmaking and editing structure that just works. So, and again, my philosophy on going back to a wide shot after close-ups is that it's always a chance to reset the frame, recenter us as to kind of where we are before we dive further into the intensity of the conversation, especially for what's to come.
Take it off.
One thing I also want to point out is how impressed I am that Jena Malone, through this entire scene, is very convincing that she's asleep. I hardly see her moving, breathing. She does a very convincing sleep acting. This is the first time that we actually reveal who's under the bunny costume. We really get to see Frank's real face. We also established that one of his eyes is gouged out, and this also makes sense because it ties into the scene when Donnie was in the mirror stabbing. What Donnie is doing and seeing is actually happening. There's real consequences to it. This character, Frank, looks like just another one of the students. He looks like a fairly normal guy. So I think it's a nice subversion of our expectations when we see Frank's actual appearance, and I like that they're able to have this dialogue with his mask off.
Why do they call you Frank?
It is the name of my father.
One thing I never really thought about until rewatching this scene now is when Frank says that it's the name of his father and his father before him.
His father before me.
What that sort of symbolizes, at least to me, is that this is a long generation of family members who maybe have always played Frank in some other past universe, or maybe in the future they will continue it on.
When's this gonna stop?
You should already know that.
The sound design and the sound mix here, I think, is beautifully integrated. So, for example, when Donnie and Frank are talking, I love that the score sort of fades to the background. We really hear them speak. Their vocals are so clear. They come in, they take our attention back to the conversation. And then when we go back to the movie screen, after Frank tells Donnie, I want you to look at the movie screen, the score comes back in full effect and just such a beautiful, haunting effect to support the visuals we're about to see.
I want you to watch the movie screen. There's something I want to show you.
So I think James Duval got a great quality of voice and has this eerie quality when he's talking just above a whisper. So I think that works really well here.
Have you ever seen a portal?
I also want to give a really big shout out here to Michael Andrews. Michael Andrews is the composer of Donnie Darko, and I really think the music here is so beautiful. It's haunting. I don't know how else to describe it, but when I see this movie theater scene, it really evokes this sort of divine feeling within me, like something greater at play is about to happen. This prophecy that's playing out is about to go further down the rabbit hole, and we're going with it as Donnie's experiencing it. So I think it's just beautifully done. I remember the first time I watched the movie and hearing the music in the scene, it just took me to a whole nother level. I think that's the power of some religious music like the Gregorian chants and choirs. I think it just speaks to our emotions on such a deeply impactful level.
Burn it to the ground.
The work of all involved, it's totally supporting this idea of all these choices are helping us serve what's in Donnie's head or what's not. But I also like that below the Evil Dead on the marquee, we have the Last Temptation of Christ. So I don't think there's any coincidence there that we're tying in these themes of religion and Christ and Donnie very much being a Christ-like figure. I also think the score supports this idea of he's getting closer and closer to his death, and the chanting almost helps summon him. It's almost as if he's getting closer to being called by the angels above. And to me, as I watch this again, the score really starts to escalate and feel like Donnie's getting closer and closer to fulfilling his ultimate purpose, which is to sacrifice himself to save the rest of the world. Absolutely beautiful, but also tragic at the same time. Karen's firing.
I'm sorry, Karen. This is a progressive school.
I really think this is such a great example of, again, the school culture, people who have certain ideals, and the principal who probably was influenced by Kitty in some fashion because she doesn't like Drew Barrymore's character or her teaching methods. When he says, you're fired and this is a progressive school, but your methods are not working.
But we don't feel the methods you've undertaken here are appropriate.
And she goes,
What exactly about my methods are inappropriate?
It's just so interesting that he even touts it like it is such a progressive school, and yet they're trying to ban this specific book earlier in the PTA scene. Some people think it's pornographic. They're going to these extremes to ban and censor certain things that are part of what a normal school curriculum would be. And so I like that he doesn't really have a good answer because he knows deep down she's right, but she's a part of the problem because she just won't fit in with the rest of the administration. Therefore, she has to go. So instead of trying to actually make it work and admit that they're wrong, and he has the authority to do so and is easily pushed around by people like Kitty, as we've established, instead of just actually trying to fight for her, it's easier to just let her go. I think this is a really important but tragic analog to the ways that a lot of power systems in our government, in our culture, in different microcosms are sometimes really affected, and good people who actually care and are passionate and are trying to send a good message, people like Karen in this film, in my opinion, are punished because they just don't fit in with the status quo of people who shout louder and have more extreme ideals and have the right people in their back pocket just based off their connections or the things that they can promise those people. And the principal's line here,
I am sorry that you have failed.
so he basically just puts it back on her because he knows he doesn't actually have a reasonable explanation for her firing. And what I think is so ironic about this line is that when he says that you have failed, I really think what's happening here is this school has failed Karen. This moment is one of the most beautiful moments in the whole film. It's just pure, raw, visceral emotion pouring out of Drew. And the quality of her scream, it's incredible. It lingers long after she finishes screaming. There's this beautiful echo. It almost seems like it's so far away. It's calling to every ounce of land in the vicinity. And it's her just completely letting out the full ounce of her emotion and frustration. For the first time in the film, I think every other moment in the film, her character is so reserved, holding holding back, very calculated. A lot of what she's not saying we're seeing on her face, but she's not actually revealing and letting it get to her. She stays very calm, collected for most of the movie. This is the one time she lets out all the emotion, the levee breaks, it all comes rushing out. And it's just beautiful to see that this is affecting Karen on such a deeper level. She does love her job. She is good at her job, and we see that. But this institution just did not appreciate her for the value that she brought to it. And ultimately, who's going to suffer really are the students. A beautiful but simple camera move, so elegant. They just subtly wrap around to reveal Cherita's character, who's watching her with earmuffs, and an outsider at the school, since Cherita's character is very much an outsider here, and she feels that, just like Drew. And it's another moment of Drew recognizing a fellow outsider and her recognizing Drew. And though they don't say a word to each other, it's very much acknowledged in the way they look at each other. Sometimes the less dialogue you put in, the better if it's working on a deeper level with the performances and the shared looks that people have. Sometimes as a writer and as a director, it's what you're not writing and it's what you're not showing that are the most effective. She's almost sang with her expression to Cherita. I hope you make it through this school environment unscathed, unlike myself. There's also another American flag that's deep in the right-hand corner of the frame that's blowing in the wind. I just caught that right now only because I stopped on the frame, but almost every time we see Karen's character, there's an American flag somewhere nearby. That's a strong choice that just feels deliberate, and it also feels consistent. Cellar Door. A nice lead in to the scene. We see Drew Barrymore again with an American flag in her box that's packed up. This is her last day. She's about to leave after she's been fired.
Hello, Donnie.
And I really like that she still has a sense of humor. She still cracks a joke.
It's Friday. Shouldn't you be off with your friends? Scaring old people.
And this shot is just a beautiful frame. We have Cellar Door written on the board. We have the American flag. We have a desk in frame. We have her sitting thumbing through a book. It's just a really well composed frame, and it feels authentic. It doesn't feel too production designed. Sometimes when you overdo the production design, it feels like, yes, this was designed. It's not organically how a classroom would probably sit.
What's going on?
Beautiful exchange. Again, Donnie and Karen very much understand each other as outsiders at this school environment. And so it's really nice to see them have this bonding moment.
Suffice to say, I'm no longer your English teacher. They fired me.
We see Donnie really acknowledge that she was one of the only people actually adding benefit as a student himself.
That's bullshit. Like the only good teacher here.
And I really like Drew's touch here where it feels like Drew Barrymore when she says,
Thank you.
Her personality transcends through the character here, and it just makes us, I think, all the more endearing to her as an audience.
What's Cellar Door?
This famous linguist once said that
This line still is one that baffles me more than any other line in the film. And I looked this up just to try to understand
of all the phrases in the English language, of all the endless combinations
why it's supposed to be the most beautiful phrase in the English language and who said it.
of words in all of history, that Cellar Door is the most beautiful.
I still haven't been able to find out if a real linguist actually said that or what that was based off of. So if anyone out there actually knows or they can speak to this, leave a comment below, since I'm still trying to figure out what the significance of Cellar Door is, beyond just the significance of Donnie going to find more clues in Roberta Sparrow's Cellar Door later in the film. Beyond that, I've still always tried to figure out what's so beautiful about Cellar Door, because rhythmically and phonetically, it isn't the most beautiful phrase I think I've ever heard, but this is one I still have no idea what the actual significance is. This exit of Drew's is absolutely amazing. It really does act as a significant metaphorical bookend to her character departing this film, if you will. It's the last time we see her, and I really love that she stumbles over the door and her box on the way out. So I think it's just one last example of how this school, even when she was on her way out, finally getting out the door, the school still gave her a hard time. It still made her struggle. This was never going to be an environment that supported what she brought to the table. So I think sometimes the best direction is willing to go against the rhythm of how a scene would feel nice if it feels more realistic, especially for that character in that moment. Jet engine falls on Donnie. So this is essentially the same sequence of at the beginning of the film when the jet engine falls on the Darko's house, only this time we are in the real universe, not the tangent universe. So in this reality, Donnie unfortunately gets crushed by the jet engine. It seals his fate, but all in an effort to save the rest of the world with him as the living receiver, which is really the sacrificial figure. So from a directing standpoint, I really like what they did here with the directing and the editing, is that the sequence of shots is almost verbatim to the first time we see it in the film when the jet engine falls on Donnie's room, except the major changes to the sequencing this time around is now we have a wide shot seeing Donnie in his bed. Now we actually see the jet engine come into the room, crash through the roof. We almost see it fall on Donnie, at least a portion of the bed. So the only thing they added was a couple additional shots to the rest of the same rhythm where we see his sister come in the door from a date, the car honks. We add a couple shots in between the same sequencing of the jet engine actually falling. But we still show the mother Rose waking up in a start. We still show the dad getting rocked from his recliner. We see the bookshelf moving. We see the chandelier swinging, and that's the very last shot of the sequence. Go back to the consistency of what happens. What rhythm are we seeing when the jet engine falls? We start seeing these same shots, and what starts to happen is we go, oh wait, we've seen these shots before. Hasn't this all played out? Except now that we add new information in, now it's very clear. We as the audience are becoming aware we're in the real universe, not the tangent universe. But I think it's just a really smart play to use the same shots, just change up a little tiny bit. In a way, I think that's a good way to also metaphorically describe the tangent universe from the real universes. They look and feel very similar, except with a few different changes. And so I think that's what this sequence is sort of metaphorically showing you. To me, it just is a great example of what late 90s, early 2000s filmmaking would handle a scene like this versus, I guarantee you, in 2024, if we were to see the same scene and show a jet engine falling into a room, I guarantee over 90% of it would be done with visual effects. In a way, we almost feel more okay with it as an audience because the first time around, we've seen this series of shots that have played out. Donnie avoided death, but we know it actually should have landed on him in the tangent universe. But this whole film has basically been a countdown to Donnie's sacrifice. And we know that every day they were counting down of those 28 days. We were almost having the chance to prepare ourselves for this inevitable moment that when he actually does get crushed by the jet engine. And I love that it actually does play out. They don't do a cop out. They don't have him actually survive it. This is the prophecy that fully plays out because he needed to be killed for this prophecy. But I think in a way it makes us feel that much less heartbreak when it happens. Not because we want to see Donnie die, but because we've had the whole 2 hours and 13 minutes to prepare ourselves for his death. So when it inevitably happens, because we've had time to prepare, we're almost more ready to accept it, if that makes sense. So I think for me, when I think about the context of grief and loss, the longer I have time to prepare and brace for it, the easier I take it versus more of a shock loss that we don't have time to prepare for. So I always find it harder to accept than something that was already almost preordained. And again, this does make Donnie the ultimate Christ-like figure and makes us truly endear to him as doing something so selfless to save everybody else. So this was something we knew was going to come at some point, whether we wanted it to or not. Dream sequence. So we also established in the director's cut that when the manipulated awaken from their journey into the tangent universe, they are often haunted by the experience in their dreams. But I think this is very significant since when they show the dream sequence with the cover of Mad World by Gary Jules, it very much shows who feels that remorse, who remembers what they did in the tangent universe, and who didn't. Keep in mind, everybody that we're seeing in this dream sequence is now in the real world. So everything they did in the tangent universe didn't happen in the real world, but they still remember it as if it did. This sequence is one of my absolute favorite sequences in any film, but especially in this film, especially at the moment in this film when it happens. It's toward the very end of the whole film. It's wrapping up everything we're kind of seeing, but I love that this montage, the way it's shot and directed and the way it flows from one bedroom into another.
All around me are familiar faces.
Is amazing because it gives us one last chance as an audience to glimpse into every major character in this film in the real world and see how they process, if they remember, if they're remorseful for what they did in the other universe.
Faces, worn out faces.
And I think it's very much a metaphor on judgment, looking back and reflecting on sort of feeling that remorse of having the chance to almost have seen that other past version of themselves, and then hopefully it informing what they do in this current universe in the best way, I think.
Going nowhere. The tears are filled.
But I think it's very much touching on that idea of if you could see yourself in another universe, would you be proud of that other version of yourself or would you not? So for one, this cover of Mad World by Gary Jules is an absolutely beautiful cover. It's a lot more slowed down of a version. It's a piano cover, and it's funny because it's actually a cover of another Tears for Fears song that is the same artist who did the sequence where they're going through the rhythmic Steadicam tracking shot. Really also perfectly sells not only the feeling of the film with the lyrics and the themes, but just the haunting tone of the film. It's such a perfect montage song. So I think that choice there was absolutely excellent. I like that we also get to establish a little bit of what their bedrooms each look like with a little bit of production design. Again, also about the choice of having Drew Barrymore's character asleep when we come through, sells us on the idea that in the real world, she has nothing to be remorseful for. Whereas it's interesting that her partner, played by Noah Wyle, who's the science teacher, he happens to be awake. So I think there's an element of, could he have done more to support Donnie maybe? This one's absolutely haunting. When we go to Jim Cunningham, we see how incredibly haunted and remorseful he is, and the regret that is seeping through him as he's shaking, he's sobbing, knowing who his self in the Tangent universe was.
That I wanna drown my sorrow. No two.
I also really like that we show Kitty in this montage because this is the first time in the film I've ever seen her have a look of doubt. In this shot, her expression completely sells that she also has remorse for the way that she was in the Tangent universe. And in a way, I think this whole montage serves to give us a little bit more empathy to the people and the way they were in the Tangent universe, knowing there's a chance that this remorse could maybe actually influence them to be better people in the real universe.
I find it kind of funny. I find it kind of sad.
I love in films where we still develop some empathy for the people that we know we shouldn't like. That just feels more believable and realistic to real life to me, but it also shows that they fully are three-dimensional, fleshed out people.
The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had.
Of course, the lyrics completely support the idea that Donnie having these premonitions, and the one where he actually does end up dying, the best it's gonna get, because that's something he knew he needed to do. We see Frank again, and on his face, also notice he doesn't have any gouge in his eye. At the end, as we're panning off, James Duvall plays Frank. He actually rubs his eye, touches his eye.
Happy birthday, happy birthday.
That concludes part 3 of why Donnie Darko is the most unique film that's ever been made. Also, Donnie Darko himself is here. He wants to say thank you for joining us. Thank you. This really is the kind of movie that doesn't get made today. I think it's such a massive creative risk. I think so many executives, production companies, or just investors are scared to take a leap of faith on a film that's this intellectually complex. We need more art like this in our culture today that makes you think and has so much time and depth put into it. And I think that's what makes it great, is it's so unique, it's so different, and it stands out in a sea of remakes and unoriginality. It It reflects culture on so many different levels, and it does it in such an elegant and beautiful package. So this really is such a masterful achievement and an accomplishment, especially for a first feature from Richard Kelly. I want to hear from you. Comment below your favorite memories of the first time you watched Donnie Darko, or what the film's symbolism means to you. Stay tuned for more movie breakdowns that we'll get to in the future, and because it's October, you can definitely look out for more horror films that we'll continue to break down the rest of this month in honor of Halloween. So I will definitely see you then.